The automated voice from my bank's fraud department was clinical, emotionless. Mrs. Thompson, we're calling regarding unusual activity on your investment account ending in 4739. A transfer of $280,000 was initiated yesterday evening using your authorized access codes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, ceramic shattering against the kitchen floor as the words registered. I'd built that bond portfolio over 8 years, saving every bonus, every tax refund, every penny I could squeeze from my marketing manager salary. It was our future, our security, our dream of opening the consulting firm I'd planned since college. The transfer authorization bore a digital signature I'd never seen, executed from an IP address in Phoenix. The only person with access to those codes was family. The only family member in Phoenix was Richard Thompson, my father-in-law, the man who'd welcomed me into the family with such warmth 5 years ago. The man who'd helped us buy our Denver townhouse by co-signing the mortgage. The man who'd been acting strangely distant during our last few Sunday dinners. Life before that phone call felt solid, predictable, carefully constructed. Daniel and I had spent 3 years building what we thought was an unshakable foundation. Our Denver townhouse sat in a quiet neighborhood where children rode bikes on sidewalks and neighbors still waved from their front porches. My marketing position at Frontier Analytics provided steady income and excellent benefits, while Daniel's work as a mechanical engineer at Lockheed kept us comfortable without being wealthy. We weren't flashy people. Our furniture came from discount stores. Our vacations involved camping in Colorado's mountains rather than exotic destinations. And our biggest indulgence was the local coffee shop where we'd meet for lunch when our schedules allowed. But we had plans, big plans. The consulting firm I'd dreamed of since earning my MBA was more than fantasy now. I'd identified the market gap, developed the business model, even found potential office space in Boulder's growing tech corridor. Every month, I'd transfer whatever remained after expenses into that bond portfolio. Conservative investments, my financial advisor had called them, but reliable. The balance had grown from $30,000 to nearly $300,000 each, deposit representing another step toward independence. Daniel would joke that I checked the account balance more often than I checked social media, and he wasn't wrong. Those numbers represented freedom from corporate hierarchies, freedom to build something meaningful, freedom to prove that the girl who'd grown up in subsidized housing could create her own success. Richard Thompson had been instrumental in our financial planning. A retired CPA with 40 years of experience, he'd guided us through mortgage applications, tax strategies, and investment decisions with paternal pride. "Smart kids plan ahead," he'd say during our monthly financial check-ins at his sprawling Phoenix home. "You're building something that'll last." His approval meant everything to Daniel, whose mother had passed away when he was 12, leaving Richard as the sole parental figure in his life. The bond portfolio had been Richard's suggestion initially. "Slow and steady," he'd explained during one of our Phoenix visits, pulling up charts on his computer to show historical returns. "Stocks are exciting until they're not. Bonds won't make you rich overnight, but they'll be there when you need them." He'd helped us set up the account structure, become the secondary authorized user for emergency access, insisted it was standard practice for family financial planning. Those Sunday dinners at our place had become routine. Richard would drive up from Phoenix every other weekend, bringing homemade salsa from his favorite market and stories from his volunteer work at the local senior center. He'd sit at our kitchen island while I cooked, regaling us with tales of teaching computer skills to residents or organizing their weekly poker games. Daniel would beam watching his father interact with me, often commenting later how grateful he was that we'd formed such a strong relationship. But something had shifted in recent months. Richard's visits became less frequent, his explanations vague. Getting older, He'd shrug when Daniel pressed him about missed dinners. Sometimes the drive just feels long. When he did visit, his attention seemed scattered. He'd check his phone constantly, step outside for mysterious calls, appear anxious, in ways I'd never witnessed before. The man who'd always been methodical, measured, began displaying an erratic energy that made conversations feel stilted. Daniel attributed his father's behavior to normal aging, perhaps some mild depression, following his retirement adjustment. He spent 40 years with structure, Daniel would rationalize. Now he's got too much time and not enough purpose. We'd discussed maybe helping Richard find more volunteer opportunities or encouraging him to visit more often, give him activities to look forward to. Neither of us suspected anything darker. The morning of that devastating phone call had started normally. Daniel left early for a project meeting at the aerospace facility, kissing me goodbye while I was still half asleep. I'd taken my time getting ready, planning to work from home reviewing marketing campaigns for a client presentation later that week. The kitchen was quiet, morning light streaming through windows overlooking our small backyard where Daniel had been attempting to grow tomatoes with mixed success. I'd been scrolling through emails with my coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed my bank's fraud prevention number, something I'd only seen once before when someone had skimmed my debit card at a gas station. I'd answered expecting routine verification of a legitimate purchase, maybe that online order of office supplies I'd placed the night before. Instead, the automated system delivered news that shattered everything I thought I knew about security, family, and trust. The voice continued mechanically, explaining that the transfer had been processed to a private investment account registered in Nevada, providing a confirmation number I frantically scribbled on a napkin. When I requested to speak with a human representative, the hold music felt like torture, each note stretching the seconds into eternity while my mind raced through possibilities. The customer service representative who finally picked up was sympathetic, but limited in what she could reveal. The transfer was authorized using your secondary access codes, Mrs. Thompson. Our system shows it was initiated from Phoenix, Arizona at 11:47 p.m. yesterday evening. Since the authorization came from a verified user on your account, it wasn't flagged as suspicious until this morning when our algorithm detected the unusual amount. Phoenix, 11:47 p.m. Richard had texted Daniel around midnight saying he was having trouble sleeping, asking if we wanted to do dinner the following Sunday. I'd thought it was sweet, an older man reaching out to family when loneliness struck. Now that timestamp felt sinister, calculated, timed perfectly when Daniel and I would be asleep and unable to monitor account activity. My hands shook as I navigated to the online banking portal, entering my credentials with trembling fingers. The account summary page loaded slowly, each second an agony of anticipation. When the numbers finally appeared, the reality hit like physical blow. Account balance, $847.23. Where $280,000 had existed yesterday, now only the minimum balance remained to keep the account active. 8 years of sacrifice. 8 years of choosing generic groceries over name brands, driving my Honda until the engine threatened to give out, postponing dental work to save money. 8 years of believing I was building something significant, something that would change the trajectory of my professional life. Gone in a single transaction authorized by someone I'd trusted with my financial future. The house felt too quiet suddenly, too empty. I called Daniel immediately, hands still shaking as I dialed his number. His phone went straight to voicemail, probably silenced for his morning meeting. I tried twice more before giving up, leaving a message that sounded more controlled than I felt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad wouldn't do that. There has to be some mistake, some fraud, someone else using his information. His denial was so absolute that I almost began questioning my own conclusions, wondering if I'd misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. We agreed to meet at home immediately. Daniel's face when he walked through the door was ashen, aged beyond his 31 years. He'd spent the drive from Lockheed making his own calls, trying to reach his father, attempting to verify the impossible. Richard's phone continued going straight to voicemail, and Daniel's growing panic was evident in his rapid-fire speech and restless pacing around our living room. "There's been some kind of identity theft," Daniel insisted, pulling out his laptop to examine our banking records himself. "Someone got Dad's information and used it to access our account. We need to report this to the police, to the FBI, to whoever handles financial crimes." He was typing furiously, searching for the appropriate authorities to contact, his engineer's mind seeking logical solutions to an illogical betrayal. I wanted desperately to believe his explanation, but the timeline troubled me deeply. The transfer had occurred at nearly midnight Phoenix time, executed with access codes only Richard possessed, from an IP address traced to his neighborhood. More disturbing was his sudden unavailability precisely when we needed him most. If someone had stolen his identity and drained our account, wouldn't he be equally panicked, equally eager to help us resolve the situation? By evening, our kitchen table was covered with printed bank statements, legal research Daniel had compiled, and contact information for various law enforcement agencies. We'd filed reports with local police, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and our bank's fraud department. Each conversation followed the same pattern: sympathetic listening, promises to investigate, requests for documentation we'd already provided, and gentle suggestions that family financial disputes often fell outside criminal jurisdiction. The transfer was authorized by someone with legitimate access to your account, the FBI agent had explained during our phone conversation. Unless we can prove coercion or identity theft, this appears to be a civil matter rather than criminal fraud. The distinction felt meaningless when our life savings had vanished, but the agent's tone suggested we were naive for expecting federal intervention in what looked like a family disagreement. Sleep that night was impossible. I lay staring at the ceiling while Daniel tossed restlessly beside me, both of us processing the magnitude of our loss. The bond portfolio hadn't just been money. It represented years of shared sacrifice and planning. Every vacation we'd skipped, every luxury we'd foregone, every extra hour I'd worked to maximize my bonuses had contributed to that account. Now it was gone, transferred to strangers in Nevada for purposes we couldn't fathom. The following morning brought our first breakthrough, though it would be days before we understood its significance. Patricia Williams from our bank's investment division called to schedule an urgent meeting, her voice carrying an unusual tension that made my stomach clench with fresh anxiety. "There are some complications with your case that require immediate attention," she explained. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person rather than over the phone." Patricia was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'd met her twice before during routine portfolio reviews, finding her professional but warm, someone who genuinely cared about her clients' financial well-being. Today, however, she appeared distinctly uncomfortable as she ushered Daniel and me into her corner office overlooking downtown Denver's financial district. "What I'm about to tell you needs to remain strictly confidential," she began, closing her office door and speaking in lowered tones. "Your bond portfolio transfer has triggered some red flags in our federal compliance monitoring system. The receiving account in Nevada has been flagged by multiple agencies as part of an ongoing investigation into organized financial crimes." The words washed over me without full comprehension initially. Federal compliance, organized crimes, investigation. These terms belonged in television dramas, not in conversations about our carefully managed bond portfolio. Daniel leaned forward, his engineering background helping him process technical information more quickly than my shock-addled brain could manage. "What kind of investigation?" he asked, his voice steadier than I felt. "And what does this mean for our money? Can it be recovered?" Patricia consulted a file folder thick with documents I couldn't read from my angle. "The details are classified, but I can tell you that multiple agencies have been tracking suspicious financial activity involving underground gambling operations, large cash transfers, unusual investment patterns, money movement designed to obscure the original sources. Your father-in-law's transaction fits a pattern they've been monitoring for several months. Underground gambling. The phrase hit me like physical impact, suddenly making Richard's recent behavior comprehensible. His mysterious phone calls, his nervous energy during family visits, his evasive explanations for missed dinners. Signs I'd interpreted as normal aging were actually symptoms of something much darker. My father-in-law, the conservative financial planner who'd preached the virtues of slow, steady investment growth, had apparently been involved with illegal gambling operations. "How much trouble is he in?" Daniel asked quietly, and I could hear the pain in his voice. Despite everything, Richard was still his father, the man who'd raised him alone after his mother's death. Learning about the theft was devastating. Discovering it connected to organized crime was overwhelming. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but grave. "I can't discuss specifics about ongoing investigations, but I can tell you that cooperation with federal authorities often influences how these cases are resolved. The sooner someone comes forward with information, the better their situation typically becomes." She provided us with contact information for Kevin Chen, an FBI financial crime specialist who'd been expecting our call. "Agent Chen has been briefed on your situation," she explained. "He's authorized to discuss certain aspects of the investigation that directly impact your case. I strongly recommend you contact him today." Walking out of that office, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved because the federal investigation might offer a path to recovering our money. Terrified because we were now connected to criminal activities we'd never imagined, drawn into a world where our conservative bond portfolio had somehow become evidence in a federal case. Agent Chen's office in the federal building downtown was stark and intimidating, all beige walls and government-issued furniture that seemed designed to emphasize the seriousness of criminal investigations. Chen himself was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. He reviewed our documentation with professional efficiency before explaining the broader context of our situation. "Your father-in-law has been identified as a participant in an organized gambling ring operating across multiple states," he began without preamble. "High-stakes poker games, sports betting, activities that generate significant cash flow requiring sophisticated money laundering operations. The group has been moving money through various investment accounts to make the funds appear legitimate." The room felt suddenly cold as Chen continued his explanation. Richard hadn't just stolen our bond portfolio to fund his gambling habit, he'd transferred it directly into accounts controlled by criminal organizations. Our carefully saved money was now evidence in a federal case involving money laundering, racketeering, and organized gambling operations that had been under surveillance for over a year. "The good news," Chen said, noting our shell-shocked expressions, "is that victims of financial crimes within organized operations often see significant recovery of their funds when cases are successfully prosecuted. The bad news is that this process can take 18 to 24 months, and your cooperation as witnesses will be essential." Cooperation as witnesses. The phrase implied testifying against Richard, providing evidence that could send Daniel's father to federal prison. I watched my husband's face as he processed this information, seeing the conflict between his desire to recover our savings and his loyalty to the man who'd raised him. The choice felt impossible: pursue justice and destroy what remained of Daniel's family, or accept the loss and allow criminals to escape consequences. "What kind of cooperation are we talking about?" Daniel asked carefully. "And what happens to my father?" Chen's response was measured, clearly something he'd explained to other families caught in similar situations. "Your father-in-law is currently in custody in Phoenix, arrested yesterday evening when he attempted to make another large transaction using falsified documents. He's facing federal charges for money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. However, defendants who cooperate fully with investigations often receive significantly reduced sentences. Richard was in jail. The man who'd helped us plan our wedding, who'd celebrated every promotion and milestone in our young marriage, was sitting in a federal detention facility facing decades in prison. Daniel's sharp intake of breath told me he was absorbing the same devastating reality. Everything we'd thought we knew about our family had been shattered in less than 48 hours. Chen provided us with victim advocacy resources, legal referrals, and a timeline for the investigation's progression. We'd need attorneys, both to protect our interests as victims and to navigate the complex federal procedures involved in asset recovery. The process would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining, but it offered our only realistic hope of reclaiming the future we'd worked so hard to build. That evening, Daniel and I sat in our living room trying to process the magnitude of what we'd learned. Our bond portfolio was evidence in a federal case. Richard was in jail facing serious charges. Our planned consulting business was indefinitely postponed while we navigated criminal proceedings. The stable, predictable life we'd built had been replaced by uncertainty, legal complexities, and the moral challenge of testifying against family. "I can't believe he dragged us into this," Daniel said finally, his voice hollow with grief and anger. 8 years of our savings, Chloe. 8 years of planning and sacrifice, and he just handed it over to criminals like it meant nothing. I understood his pain, but I was beginning to see something else in our situation. Yes, Richard had betrayed us catastrophically. Yes, our immediate plans were ruined. But the federal investigation also meant accountability, justice, and the possibility of recovering funds we'd initially thought were lost forever. More importantly, we'd been thrown into circumstances that would force us to develop skills, connections, and resilience we'd never needed before. The next morning brought a call from Linda Rodriguez, a federal crimes victim advocate who'd been assigned to our case. Her voice was warm and professional as she explained the support services available to us, the timeline for asset recovery proceedings, and the importance of maintaining detailed records throughout the process. "I know this. Feels overwhelming," she said. "But you're not alone in this. We work with families like yours regularly, and most people are surprised by how much strength they discover during these proceedings." Linda scheduled our first meeting for the following week, where we'd begin the process of documenting our losses, understanding our rights as victims, and preparing for the long journey toward recovery. She also provided referrals to attorneys specializing in federal financial crimes, professionals who could guide us through legal complexities while protecting our interests. As I hung up the phone, I realized something unexpected was happening. Instead of feeling helpless and victimized, I was beginning to feel purposeful, even energized. The situation required skills I'd developed during my marketing career: research, organization, communication, strategic planning. For the first time since learning about the theft, I felt like I could take meaningful action rather than simply reacting to catastrophe. Daniel noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. "You're getting that look," he said with the first smile I'd seen from him in days. "The same expression you get when you're planning a complex marketing campaign." He was right. My mind was already working through the challenge ahead, identifying resources we'd need, timelines we'd face, strategies for maximizing our recovery while minimizing the emotional toll. The bond portfolio theft had been devastating, but it had also connected us to federal resources, legal expertise, and advocacy services we'd never have accessed otherwise. Richard's crime had accidentally opened doors we didn't even know existed. The irony wasn't lost on me that our careful, conservative approach to financial planning had made us victims of organized crime, while that same criminal activity might ultimately provide opportunities for growth and development we'd never have pursued otherwise. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create the conditions for the best things we never could have imagined. The attorney's office felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Linda Rodriguez had referred us to Amanda Foster, a specialist in federal financial crimes, whose reputation for recovering assets from organized criminal operations was legendary among victim advocates. Amanda's office occupied the top floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains and a conference room that could have hosted board meetings for Fortune 500 companies. Amanda herself was nothing like I'd expected from a federal crimes attorney. Probably in her mid-40s, she dressed in sharp business suits but spoke with the warmth of someone who genuinely cared about her clients' well-being rather than just their legal cases. Her walls displayed certificates from law schools I recognized and commendations from federal agencies I'd only heard mentioned in news reports. "The first thing you need to understand," Amanda explained during our initial consultation, "is that financial crimes connected to organized operations are complex beasts with multiple moving parts. Your case isn't just about recovering your bond portfolio, it's about understanding how criminal organizations move money, hide assets, and exploit legitimate financial systems to launder illegal proceeds." She spread documents across her conference table, creating a visual map of the investigation that had accidentally ensnared our family. Charts showed money flows between accounts in Nevada, Arizona, California, and Colorado. Names I didn't recognize were connected by lines indicating financial relationships, gambling debts, and money transfers that created a web of criminal activity spanning multiple years. Richard's gambling problem made him vulnerable to recruitment by this organization, Amanda continued, pointing to documentation that showed his progression from occasional participant to regular player, to someone who owed substantial sums to dangerous people. When he couldn't cover his debts through normal means, they offered him opportunities to earn money by providing access to legitimate accounts that could be used for laundering operations. The revelation that Richard hadn't just stolen our money impulsively but had been systematically recruited by criminals felt like another betrayal. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was calculated involvement in organized crime that had put our entire family at risk. Daniel sat silently beside me, processing the information with the methodical approach he brought to engineering problems, but I could see the pain in his expression. "What's our realistic timeline for recovery?" I asked, my marketing background making me focus on measurable outcomes and concrete deadlines. "And what do we need to do to maximize our chances of getting our money back?" Amanda's smile suggested she appreciated clients who asked direct questions. "Federal asset forfeiture cases typically take 18 to 36 months from arrest to final distribution. Your cooperation as witnesses will be crucial, but equally important will be your ability to document every aspect of your financial relationship with Richard, every conversation about investment strategies, every time he had access to your account information." She handed us thick folders containing forms, questionnaires, and documentation requirements that would govern the next phase of our lives. Banking records, email communications, phone logs, calendar entries showing Richard's visits to our home. The federal government wanted a complete picture of how our family's financial planning had become entangled with criminal operations. "I'm also going to recommend something that might seem unusual," Amanda continued. "I want you to consider taking a more active role in understanding financial crimes investigation. There are training programs, conferences, advocacy organizations, where victims learn about the systems that failed to protect them. Knowledge becomes power in these situations." The suggestion felt overwhelming initially. I was a marketing manager, not a financial crimes investigator. But Amanda's reasoning made sense. The more we understood about how our case fit into broader patterns of criminal activity, the better equipped we'd be to advocate for ourselves throughout the lengthy legal process. That evening, Daniel and I spread Amanda's materials across our dining room table, beginning the intensive documentation process that would consume the next several months. Bank statements, investment records, email threads, calendar entries, photographs from family gatherings where financial topics had been discussed. Every interaction with Richard needed to be cataloged, analyzed, and reported to federal investigators. The work was tedious, but oddly therapeutic. Instead of feeling helpless about our situation, we were taking concrete action to support the investigation that might recover our savings. Each document we organized, each timeline we constructed, each detail we remembered and recorded felt like striking back against the people who'd victimized our family. Daniel proved surprisingly skilled at the investigative work. His engineering background had taught him to analyze complex systems and identify patterns within seemingly random data. He created spreadsheets tracking Richard's behavior changes over the past year, correlating his distant moods with dates when large gambling losses appeared in court documents Amanda shared with us. "Look at this," Daniel said one evening, pointing to his analysis. "Every time Dad seemed distracted during our Sunday dinners corresponds to major losses in the gambling operation. He wasn't becoming antisocial because of retirement. He was stressed about money he owed to criminals." My contribution focused on reconstructing conversations about our financial planning, especially instances when Richard had encouraged us to consolidate our investments or simplify our account structures. What we'd interpreted as helpful advice had actually been strategic manipulation, making our money more accessible when he eventually needed to steal it. The documentation process connected us with other victims of the same criminal organization. Amanda arranged meetings with 3 other families whose savings had been stolen by gambling addicts recruited by the same group. Hearing their stories was both heartbreaking and encouraging. Heartbreaking because the criminals had destroyed multiple families' financial security. Encouraging because we weren't alone in our experience or our determination to seek justice. Mark Davis and his wife had lost their retirement savings when his brother-in-law transferred $340,000 from their joint investment account to the Nevada operation. Sarah Kim discovered her business partner had been using their company's cash reserves to cover gambling debts, leaving their successful restaurant chain facing bankruptcy. Each family's story followed similar patterns of trust exploited, relationships destroyed, and financial futures stolen by people they'd loved and trusted. "The thing that saved my sanity," Mark explained during one of our group meetings, "was realizing that understanding their system gave me power over my recovery. The more I learned about how financial crimes work, the better I could advocate for myself with federal agents and attorneys." He'd taken Amanda's advice about education seriously, attending conferences on financial crimes investigation, reading academic papers about money laundering operations, even earning certifications in fraud prevention from professional organizations. What started as self-protection had evolved into expertise that now helped other victims navigate similar situations. Sarah had focused her efforts on understanding the legal system itself, learning about federal procedures, asset forfeiture, laws, and victim advocacy programs. She'd become so knowledgeable that prosecutors' offices occasionally asked her to speak with newly discovered victims, helping them understand their rights and options within federal proceedings. Their examples inspired me to dive deeper into the educational opportunities Amanda had mentioned. I enrolled in online courses about financial crimes investigation offered by professional organizations and federal agencies. The material was challenging, covering topics I'd never encountered in marketing school, but it was also fascinating in ways I hadn't expected. Learning about criminal money laundering operations revealed the sophisticated planning and execution required to move illegal funds through legitimate financial systems. These weren't simple crimes of opportunity, but complex operations requiring detailed knowledge of banking regulations, investment procedures, and federal oversight mechanisms. The criminals who'd recruited Richard were running business operations, just illegal ones. Daniel began attending local meetings of a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, not because he blamed Richard's disease for the theft, but because understanding addiction helped him process his father's choices. The group meetings also connected him with resources for family members dealing with the aftermath of gambling-related crimes. "I'm starting to understand that Dad's addiction didn't cause him to become a criminal," Daniel explained after one particularly difficult group session. "But the criminals understood how to exploit his addiction to turn him into a tool for their operations. He's both a perpetrator and a victim, which makes this whole situation more complicated than I'd realized." 3 months into our documentation and education process, Agent Chen contacted us with encouraging news. The federal investigation had expanded significantly based on evidence recovered from accounts connected to our case. Multiple arrests had been made, including several high-level organizers of the gambling operation. More importantly for our situation, federal agents had identified and frozen accounts containing over $2.3 million in stolen funds from various victims. "Your bond portfolio appears to be intact and identifiable within the seized assets," Chen explained during a meeting at his office. "Recovery isn't guaranteed until final prosecution outcomes, but the prospects are much more positive than when we first spoke." The news felt like winning a lottery, but Amanda cautioned us against premature celebration. Federal asset forfeiture. Procedures required successful prosecution of criminal defendants, detailed documentation of legitimate ownership claims, and complex legal proceedings that could still take months or years to complete. "However," she added with a smile, "your proactive approach to understanding the system and documenting your case has put you in an excellent position when distribution proceedings begin. Victims who can demonstrate clear ownership and cooperate fully with investigations typically see the best recovery outcomes." By this point, I'd completed 4 courses in financial crimes investigation and fraud prevention. The knowledge gained felt empowering in ways that had nothing to do with our specific case. Understanding how criminals exploited financial systems made me more aware of protecting myself and others from similar schemes. The skills I was developing had applications far beyond recovering our stolen bonds. Daniel had become something of an expert on federal legal procedures, able to explain complex aspects of our case to friends and family who struggled to understand what we were experiencing. His engineering background, combined with his new legal knowledge, made him incredibly effective at organizing information and presenting arguments to federal investigators. Our transformation from victims to informed advocates was gradual but unmistakable. Instead of feeling helpless about our situation, we'd developed expertise that made us valuable participants in the investigation. Federal agents began consulting us about other victims' cases, asking for our insights about recruitment patterns and financial exploitation techniques. "You've both become resources for our investigation rather than just subjects of it," Agent Chen observed during one of our regular check-in meetings. "Your understanding of how the criminal organization operated helps us build stronger cases against the remaining defendants." The irony wasn't lost on me that Richard's betrayal had accidentally launched us into careers we'd never considered. What started as desperate attempts to recover our stolen savings had evolved into genuine expertise in financial crimes investigation and victim advocacy. We were discovering capabilities and interests we'd never known we possessed, building skills that would serve us long after our immediate case was resolved. 8 months after that devastating phone call from the bank's fraud department, I was standing before a conference room filled with federal agents, prosecutors, and financial crimes specialists, presenting analysis I'd compiled about patterns in money laundering operations that had helped identify 3 additional criminal organizations. The woman who'd once checked her bond portfolio balance more often than social media had become someone federal investigators consulted for expertise in financial crimes patterns. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Each course I'd completed, each document I'd analyzed, each victim I'd helped had built knowledge that federal agencies valued highly. My marketing background had proven surprisingly relevant to understanding how criminal organizations promoted their services and recruited participants. The same skills I'd used to identify target demographics for legitimate businesses helped Investigators understand how financial predators selected their victims. Amanda Foster had been instrumental in connecting me with broader opportunities within the federal law enforcement community. Your case analysis and victim advocacy work has impressed several people in important positions, she'd explained during one of our monthly meetings. There's a consulting opportunity with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division that might interest you. They need someone who understands both the victim perspective and the investigative process. The consulting position involved reviewing cases similar to ours, helping federal agents understand how criminals recruited family members and friends to provide access to legitimate accounts. My experience with Richard's gradual recruitment and eventual betrayal provided insights that helped investigators identify warning signs in other families before financial damage occurred. Daniel had found his own path into the field through his work with gambling addiction support groups. His engineering background, combined with his personal experience and legal knowledge gained during our case, made him valuable to organizations helping families deal with gambling-related financial crimes. He'd begun speaking at conferences about the intersection of addiction and organized crime, helping other families understand the complex dynamics we'd navigated. The technical aspects of money laundering operations are fascinating once you understand the underlying systems, Daniel explained to a group of family members dealing with similar situations. Criminal organizations exploit the same vulnerabilities in financial systems that legitimate businesses use for normal operations. Understanding those vulnerabilities helps families protect themselves and helps investigators build stronger cases. Our monthly victim support group meetings had evolved into something resembling professional development sessions. Mark Davis had launched a consulting business helping banks and investment firms identify suspicious activity patterns. Sarah Kim was working with restaurant industry associations to help business owners recognize signs of financial exploitation by partners or employees. Each of us had transformed expertise gained through victimization into resources that helped others avoid similar experiences. We've accidentally become a think tank for financial crimes prevention, Sarah observed during one of our meetings. Law enforcement agencies are starting to recognize that victims who educate themselves become incredibly valuable resources for protecting other potential victims. My work with the FBI had expanded beyond consulting on individual cases to helping develop training materials for agents investigating organized financial crimes. The agency was creating educational programs to help victims understand their rights and options, and they wanted someone with personal experience to help design curricula that would be both informative and emotionally supportive. Your unique perspective as someone who's experienced both the victimization and the investigation process makes you ideally suited for this work, explained Director Lisa Martinez, who supervised the FBI's Victim Services Division. We need people who can bridge the gap between federal procedures and human experiences. The training development work was challenging, but deeply satisfying. Creating materials that would help other families navigate federal investigations felt like transforming our traumatic experience into something genuinely helpful for others. Each module I developed, each resource guide I wrote, each presentation I delivered was another step toward ensuring that other victims would have better support than we'd initially received. Daniel's expertise had attracted attention from federal prosecutors who needed expert witnesses to explain complex family dynamics in financial crimes cases. His ability to articulate how criminals exploit family relationships while maintaining objectivity about his father's choices made him valuable for educating juries about the sophisticated manipulation techniques these organizations employed. Testifying about Dad's recruitment was one of the hardest things I've ever done, Daniel admitted after his first court appearance as an expert witness. But helping juries understand how these criminals destroy families felt like honoring the good man my father was before addiction made him vulnerable to exploitation. Our case had finally reached the asset recovery phase after 14 months of investigation and prosecution. The criminal organization had been dismantled, with most defendants accepting plea agreements that included cooperation with ongoing investigations. Richard had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his extensive cooperation with federal agents, helping them understand recruitment techniques and money movement procedures. Agent Chen called us to his office for what he described as the final meeting of our case. The federal building that had once seemed intimidating now felt familiar, a place where I'd attended dozens of meetings, presentations, and briefings over the previous year. Chen's office, which had once felt stark and governmental, now seemed like the workplace of a colleague I'd collaborated with extensively. "I have good news and excellent news," Chen began with a rare smile. "The good news is that your bond portfolio has been fully recovered and will be returned to your control within 30 days. The excellent news is that federal prosecutors have identified additional assets that appear to represent profits generated by your stolen funds while they were in criminal control. The additional assets amounted to nearly $47,000, representing investment gains and proceeds from money laundering activities that had used our bonds as collateral for larger operations. Federal law allowed victims to recover not just their original losses, but any profits criminals had generated using stolen funds. Your cooperation throughout this investigation has been exemplary," Chen continued. "Your documentation, analysis, and victim advocacy work helped us build cases against 17 defendants and recover assets for 38 families. The Financial Crimes Division has asked me to discuss permanent opportunities with both of you." The permanent opportunity involved creating a new position within the FBI's Victim Services Division, someone who would work full-time helping victims of organized financial crimes understand their rights, navigate federal procedures, and develop the knowledge needed to advocate effectively for themselves. The position would be based in Denver, allowing us to maintain our home while traveling occasionally to support investigations in other regions. For Daniel, the opportunity involved consulting work with federal prosecutors, helping them prepare cases involving family-based financial crimes and serving as an expert witness when family dynamics were central to criminal prosecutions. His engineering background, combined with his legal knowledge and personal experience, made him uniquely qualified to explain complex family manipulation techniques to juries. We never expected to become federal law enforcement consultants, I told Amanda during our final attorney-client meeting. A year ago, the most complex legal issue we dealt with was reviewing our mortgage documents. Amanda laughed, a sound I'd rarely heard from her during the intense months of our case. "You've both demonstrated something I see in the most successful victims I work with. Instead of allowing the crime to define you as powerless, you've used the experience to develop power and expertise that benefits many other people." The consulting business I'd dreamed of opening was finally becoming reality, but with a focus I'd never anticipated. Instead of general marketing consulting, I was launching a specialized practice helping families and businesses understand financial crimes prevention and victim advocacy. My first client was a regional bank wanting to improve their customer education programs about fraud prevention. Daniel's mechanical engineering career had evolved to include forensic financial analysis, helping legal teams understand the technical aspects of money movement in complex criminal cases. His ability to explain intricate financial procedures in accessible terms made him valuable for both prosecution and defense teams working on white-collar crime cases. "The business model practically designs itself," Daniel observed as we planned our joint consulting practice. "There's enormous demand for people who understand both the technical and human aspects of financial crimes. Law enforcement agencies, banks, victim advocacy organizations, even insurance companies need consultants who can bridge those gaps." Our home office, which had once displayed my marketing awards and Daniel's engineering certifications, now showcased commendations from federal agencies, certificates from advanced fraud investigation courses, and photographs from conferences where we'd spoken about victim advocacy and financial crimes prevention. The transformation was complete, but unexpected. Richard's betrayal had destroyed our planned consulting business, but accidentally launched careers we'd never imagined. The bond portfolio that was supposed to fund our entrepreneurial dreams had been stolen, recovered, and supplemented with criminal proceeds that now provided capital for a business serving victims of financial crimes. We're helping other families avoid or recover from experiences like ours, I reflected during one of our planning sessions. There's something poetic about using expertise gained through victimization to prevent other people from becoming victims. Our relationship with Richard remained complicated, but had evolved beyond simple anger or forgiveness. His cooperation with federal investigators had been genuine and extensive, helping prosecutors understand recruitment techniques that might otherwise have remained secret. His reduced sentence reflected both his willingness to accept responsibility and his value as a cooperating witness. "Dad made terrible choices that hurt our family and many others," Daniel said during one of our conversations about Richard's situation. "But his cooperation helped prevent other families from experiencing what we went through. I can't forgive him yet, but I can respect that he tried to help fix some of the damage he caused." The federal investigation that had accidentally ensnared our family had become the foundation for careers neither of us had planned, but both of us found deeply meaningful. We were using knowledge gained through trauma to help others navigate similar challenges, transforming our victimization into expertise that served the broader community. As I prepared for my first major presentation at a national conference on financial crimes prevention, I thought about the woman who'd answered that phone call from the bank's fraud department 14 months earlier. She'd been focused on building a marketing consulting business, checking bond portfolio balances, and maintaining the comfortable predictability of suburban life. The woman preparing to address federal agents, prosecutors, and victim advocates from across the country had expertise that woman could never have imagined. She understood complex money laundering operations, federal legal procedures, and victim advocacy techniques that helped families rebuild their lives after financial devastation. Richard had meant to solve his gambling debts by stealing our carefully saved money. Instead, he'd accidentally connected us to a federal investigation that transformed us from victims into leaders in the financial crimes prevention community. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us accidentally provide the catalyst for discovering our greatest strengths and most meaningful purposes. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the familiar space transformed by the knowledge that criminals were actively discussing our family. My expertise in financial crimes investigation had taught me enough about organized criminal behavior to understand the implications of Chen's warning. People who viewed us as threats wouldn't hesitate to take action against perceived enemies of their operations. "What kind of action are we talking about?" Daniel asked, his engineering mind seeking concrete information about abstract threats. "Are we in physical danger, or is this more about disrupting our consulting work?" Chen consulted a file that appeared to contain surveillance reports and intelligence gathered from ongoing investigations. The intercepted communications suggest they're primarily concerned about your ability to help other victims identify and recover stolen assets. Your success rate in asset recovery cases has apparently gained their attention in ways that make them nervous about their future operations. The revelation that our victim advocacy work had become threatening to criminal organizations felt surreal. 18 months ago, I'd been a marketing manager whose biggest professional challenge involved developing advertising campaigns for local businesses. Now federal agents were warning me that organized criminals considered my expertise a threat to their illegal operations. However, Chen continued with a slight smile, this development also presents an opportunity that could significantly advance ongoing federal investigations. Richard's contact with these criminals provides us with a potential avenue for infiltrating their organization and gathering evidence about their recruitment and money laundering procedures. The suggestion that Richard might become an undercover asset for federal investigations seemed to emerge from the realm of television dramas rather than our suburban Denver reality. The man who'd stolen our bond portfolio to cover gambling debts was being asked to help federal agents infiltrate criminal organizations by pretending to cooperate with their recruitment efforts. The decision is ultimately Richard's, Chen explained. but his cooperation could help us prevent dozens of families from experiencing what you went through. It would also provide additional protection for both of you, since successful prosecution of this organization would eliminate the threat they currently pose. Daniel and I exchanged glances that communicated months of shared experience navigating federal investigations and victim advocacy work. Our relationship with Richard remained complicated, balanced between anger over his betrayal and respect for his cooperation with law enforcement. The possibility that he might help prevent other families from being victimized added another layer to our already complex feelings about his situation. What would this involve exactly? I asked, my consulting experience with federal agencies, helping me understand the importance of concrete details in any cooperative arrangement. And what are the risks for Richard and for our family? Chen's explanation revealed the sophisticated planning behind federal undercover operations. Richard would maintain contact with the criminal recruiters while wearing surveillance equipment that recorded their conversations and documented their money laundering procedures. He would appear to cooperate with their recruitment efforts while actually gathering evidence for federal prosecutors. The risks are significant, Chen acknowledged. Organized criminal operations don't respond well to discovery of federal infiltration. Richard would be in genuine danger if his cooperation was detected, and your family could face retaliation if criminals concluded you were involved in the investigation. The choice felt impossible, yet familiar. 14 months of victim advocacy work had taught me that meaningful progress against organized crime required accepting risks that comfortable suburban life had never demanded. Every family we'd helped recover stolen assets had faced similar decisions about cooperation with federal investigations despite potential dangers. There's another factor to consider, Chen added. The FBI is prepared to offer both of you permanent positions with the Financial Crimes Division if this operation succeeds. Your expertise in victim advocacy and financial crimes analysis has impressed people in very senior positions within the agency. Permanent positions with the FBI represented career opportunities we'd never imagined before Richard's betrayal forced us into the world of federal law enforcement. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division provided resources and authority that transformed our impact from helping individual families to shaping policies that would protect potential victims across the entire country. Federal training programs we developed were implemented in field offices nationwide, standardizing victim advocacy procedures and improving recovery outcomes for families dealing with financial crimes. You've essentially created a new subspecialty within federal law enforcement, Director Martinez observed during my first annual performance review. Victim advocacy informed by personal experience and technical expertise represents an approach that other agencies are adopting for their own financial crimes programs. Daniel's technical analysis work had resulted in software tools that helped federal investigators identify money laundering patterns and trace stolen assets through complex criminal networks. His engineering background, combined with legal knowledge gained during our case, enabled him to design investigative procedures that significantly improved federal success rates in asset recovery cases. Richard's situation had stabilized in ways that allowed our family relationships to begin healing, though the process remained complicated and gradual. His cooperation with federal investigations had earned him early release from prison, along with placement in witness protection, programs that would ensure his safety from criminal organizations he'd helped prosecute. I know I can never undo the damage I caused your family, Richard said during one of our carefully supervised meetings in a federal facility designed for witness protection communications. But knowing that my cooperation helped prevent other families from experiencing what you went through gives my life meaning it hasn't had since my gambling addiction began. Our forgiveness remained incomplete, but was progressing toward acceptance of Richard's efforts to make amends for his betrayal. The man who'd stolen our bond portfolio had become instrumental in helping hundreds of other families recover stolen assets and avoid financial victimization. His redemption felt authentic because it involved genuine sacrifice and ongoing commitment to helping others, rather than simply expressing regret about his actions. 2 years after that devastating phone call from the bank's fraud department, Daniel and I were living in Washington, D.C., working for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and leading national efforts to improve victim advocacy in federal investigations. Our home office displayed commendations from federal agencies across the country, photographs from conferences where we'd spoken about financial crimes prevention, and letters from families whose lives had been improved by programs we'd developed. The bond portfolio that Richard had stolen, and that had eventually been recovered with additional criminal proceeds, had become the foundation for a trust fund supporting financial crimes victim advocacy programs. Instead of funding the consulting business we'd originally planned, our savings now supported organizations helping other families navigate federal investigations and recover stolen assets. We've built something more meaningful than the business we'd originally envisioned, I reflected during one of our conversations about the unexpected direction our lives had taken. Richard's betrayal destroyed our plans but accidentally connected us to purposes we never could have imagined. The woman who'd answered that phone call from the bank's fraud department had been focused on building a marketing consulting business and checking bond portfolio balances. The woman now designing national victim advocacy programs for the FBI understood complex financial crimes operations, federal legal procedures, and investigative techniques that had helped hundreds of families recover stolen assets and rebuild their lives after financial devastation. Richard had meant to solve his gambling debts by stealing our carefully saved money, never imagining that his crime would connect us to a federal investigation that would transform us from suburban professionals into national leaders in financial crimes prevention. Sometimes the people who betray us most completely accidentally provide the experiences that reveal our greatest capabilities and most important contributions to the world. The federal investigation he'd unknowingly triggered by stealing our bond portfolio had dismantled criminal organizations that had operated undetected for years, recovered over $200 million in stolen assets for hundreds of families, and established investigation methodologies that would protect potential victims for decades to come. His attempt to destroy our financial security had accidentally launched careers dedicated to protecting other families from similar victimization. Standing in my FBI office overlooking the Potomac River, preparing for another meeting with federal investigators seeking guidance on victim advocacy procedures, I thought about the profound transformation that had occurred since that morning when ceramic coffee mug fragments had scattered across our Denver kitchen floor. The woman who'd cut her finger gathering those pieces could never have imagined she'd become someone federal agencies consulted for expertise in financial crimes prevention. Richard's betrayal had been devastating, but had accidentally provided the catalyst for discovering strengths, purposes, and capabilities I'd never known existed. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create the conditions for the best things we never could have imagined for ourselves or for the many other people our experiences eventually help. The secure telephone call came at 6 a.m, 3 months into Richard's undercover operation. Daniel answered on the second ring, instantly alert despite the early hour. Agent Chen's voice carried an urgency I'd rarely heard during our 18 months of working together on financial crimes investigations. "We have a problem," Chen said without preamble. "Richard's cover may have been compromised. The criminal organization has started asking questions about his family connections, specifically about your consulting work with federal agencies. We need you both at the field office immediately." The drive to the federal building felt surreal in the pre-dawn darkness. Streets that had become familiar during months of meetings and briefings now seemed ominous, every parked car potentially containing surveillance equipment or hostile observers. My expertise in financial crimes investigation had taught me enough about organized criminal behavior to understand that blown covers often resulted in violence against anyone connected to the infiltration operation. Agent Chen met us at a side entrance I'd never used before, leading us through security checkpoints and corridors that bypassed the public areas of the building. His expression was grim as he escorted us to a secure conference room where several people I didn't recognize were studying surveillance photographs and transcribed conversations. At 3 this morning, Richard met with two senior members of the criminal organization, Chen began, spreading photographs across the conference table. The conversation started normally, discussing money laundering procedures and recruitment targets. But then they began asking specific questions about his family, particularly about a son who works in federal law enforcement consultation. The photographs showed Richard sitting in what appeared to be a restaurant booth, wearing the concealed recording equipment that had been documenting criminal conversations for months. His body language in the images suggested tension, the careful positioning of someone trying to appear relaxed while actually being extremely alert to danger. How specific were their questions? Daniel asked, his engineering background making him focus on technical details that might indicate the scope of the security breach. Did they mention our names, our consulting business, or specific cases we've worked on? Chen consulted transcribed notes from the recorded conversation, his expression growing more serious as he reviewed the criminal organization's inquiries. They mentioned your consulting firm by name, referenced your work on victim advocacy training, and specifically asked about your access to federal investigation information. Someone has been researching your background very thoroughly. The realization that organized criminals had been investigating our professional activities felt like another violation, similar to discovering Richard's original theft but more threatening. These weren't desperate gambling addicts making impulsive decisions. They were sophisticated criminal operators conducting strategic intelligence gathering about potential threats to their operations. The immediate concern, Chen continued, is that they may attempt to eliminate what they perceive as threats to their organization. Your consulting work has helped dozens of families recover stolen assets, which represents millions of dollars in losses for various criminal groups. You've essentially become high-value targets for people who don't hesitate to use violence against perceived enemies. A new voice entered the conversation as Director Lisa Martinez entered the conference room, accompanied by two people whose serious expressions and federal identification badges suggested senior law enforcement positions. Martinez's presence indicated that our situation had escalated beyond routine investigation management into crisis response territory. We're implementing immediate protection protocols, Martinez announced, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. Your safety and Richard's continued operation both depend on convincing this criminal organization that you pose no threat to their activities. The protection protocols involved temporary relocation to a secure federal facility while investigators determined the extent of the security breach and developed strategies for neutralizing the threat. Our home, consulting business, and normal routines would be suspended, while federal agents worked to protect both our family and the integrity of Richard's undercover operation. How long are we talking about? I asked, my victim advocacy experience helping me understand the importance of realistic timelines in crisis situations. And what happens to our consulting clients and federal training commitments while we're in protective custody? Martinez's response revealed the complexity of balancing immediate safety concerns with ongoing professional responsibilities that affected many other families and federal investigations. We're hoping for resolution within 2 to 3 weeks. But organized criminal investigations don't follow predictable schedules. Your consulting clients will be transferred to other advocates, and federal training programs will be postponed until your safety is assured. The secure facility was located outside Washington, D.C., a nondescript building that could have housed any type of government office, but actually served as temporary housing for federal witnesses and their families during high-risk investigations. Our quarters included basic living accommodations, communication equipment for maintaining limited contact with the outside world, and access to federal resources that would allow us to continue some aspects of our advocacy work remotely. This feels like being in witness protection without actually entering the program, Daniel observed as we settled into our temporary home. We're hiding from criminals who want to silence us because we've become too effective at helping their victims. The irony wasn't lost on me that our expertise in financial crimes investigation, developed originally to recover our own stolen assets, had become so threatening to criminal organizations that federal agents needed to protect us from retaliation. Richard's theft of our bond portfolio had accidentally launched careers that were now significant enough to warrant organized criminal attention. During our second day in protective custody, Agent Chen provided updates on Richard's situation that revealed how quickly undercover operations could become life-threatening when security was compromised. The criminal organization had moved Richard to a different location and was subjecting him to increasingly intense questioning about his family connections and potential law enforcement cooperation. "He's maintaining his cover story effectively," Chen reported during one of our secure briefings. "But the criminals are clearly suspicious about his background and motivations. The recording equipment is still functioning, providing valuable intelligence about their security procedures and leadership structure. But Richard's personal safety is becoming more precarious." The recordings from Richard's interactions with his criminal handlers were both fascinating and terrifying, revealing the sophisticated planning and ruthless decision-making that characterized organized financial crime operations. These weren't impulsive criminals but business operators who carefully calculated risks and eliminated threats through methods that ranged from financial pressure to physical violence. They're discussing whether Richard represents an acceptable risk or should be eliminated as a potential security threat, Chen explained while playing selected portions of the recorded conversations. "His cooperation with our investigation could end abruptly if they conclude he's more dangerous than useful to their operations. My advocacy work with crime victims had taught me about the psychological impact of extended uncertainty, but experiencing it directly felt different from helping others navigate similar situations. The combination of personal danger, professional disruption, and concern for Richard's safety created stress levels that challenged coping mechanisms I'd developed through months of federal law enforcement consultation." Daniel's response to protective custody reflected his engineering background's preference for concrete problems with measurable solutions. Unable to take direct action about our safety, he focused on analyzing the criminal organization's structure and procedures, using recorded conversations and federal intelligence to understand their decision-making processes and vulnerability patterns. "These people operate like any other business," Daniel explained during one of our evening discussions in the secure facility. "They have management structures, risk assessment procedures, and strategic planning processes. Understanding their business model helps predict their likely responses to various scenarios." His analysis proved valuable to federal investigators who were simultaneously protecting our family and gathering evidence for eventual prosecution of the criminal organization. Daniel's insights about their operational procedures helped agents identify weaknesses that could be exploited to gather additional evidence while minimizing risks to Richard and other undercover assets. Agent Chen's daily briefings provided updates on the broader investigation that had grown far beyond our original case into a multi-state operation involving dozens of federal agents and prosecutors. Richard's undercover work had revealed connections between criminal organizations that investigators hadn't suspected, creating opportunities for coordinated prosecutions that could significantly impact organized financial crime across the entire country. "Your father's cooperation has been extraordinary," Chen told Daniel during one of their private conversations. "Despite obvious personal danger, he's continued gathering intelligence that will help convict people responsible for victimizing hundreds of families. His transformation from criminal participant to federal asset has been remarkable." The complexity of our feelings about Richard remained challenging to navigate. Anger over his original betrayal competed with respect for his current courage, while concern for his safety battled with awareness that his criminal choices had created the dangerous situation he now faced. Forgiveness felt premature, but admiration for his commitment to helping other victims seemed appropriate. 2 weeks into our protective custody, federal agents achieved a breakthrough that changed both the immediate threat level and the long-term prospects for prosecution of the criminal organization. Surveillance teams had identified the source of intelligence about our consulting work: a corrupt federal employee who'd been selling information about ongoing investigations to criminal organizations for over 2 years. The security breach wasn't related to Richard's operation, Martinez explained during an emergency briefing. A civilian contractor with access to federal databases had been providing criminal organizations with information about victim advocates, federal witnesses, and ongoing investigations. His arrest this morning eliminated the source of intelligence that made you targets. The corrupt employee's arrest resolved the immediate threat to our safety, but revealed a broader problem within federal law enforcement systems. Criminal organizations had been purchasing information about victim advocates, witnesses, and investigation procedures, giving them significant advantages in avoiding prosecution and intimidating people who might cooperate with federal authorities. This discovery will lead to major changes in how we protect sensitive information and screen personnel with access to federal databases, Martinez continued. Your case accidentally exposed security vulnerabilities that have been compromising investigations and endangering victims for several years. Our release from protective custody felt anticlimactic after weeks of high-tension security measures and constant vigilance about potential threats. Returning to our consulting business and federal training responsibilities required readjusting to normal routines while processing the reality that our expertise had become valuable enough to warrant organized criminal attention and federal protection. Richard's undercover operation concluded successfully 3 days after our release, with federal agents arresting 47 members of the criminal organization and seizing assets worth over $89 million. His cooperation had provided evidence connecting criminal groups across 7 states, resulting in prosecutions that would significantly disrupt organized financial crime operations throughout the region. The intelligence gathered through Richard's work will influence federal law enforcement strategies for years to come, Agent Chen explained during our final case debriefing. His transformation from gambling addict and financial criminal to federal asset represents one of the most successful cooperation agreements in recent FBI history. The successful conclusion of the undercover operation and resolution of the security threat opened opportunities for expanded federal careers that we'd been unable to pursue while our safety remained uncertain. Director Martinez offered permanent positions with increased responsibilities and national scope, allowing us to develop victim advocacy programs that would serve families across the entire country. Your experience as victims who became expert advocates, combined with your understanding of federal investigation procedures, makes you uniquely qualified for senior positions within the Financial Crimes Division, Martinez explained. We're prepared to offer you leadership roles in developing national policies and training programs that could help thousands of families annually. The permanent federal positions represented career opportunities that exceeded anything we'd imagined. Before Richard's betrayal forced us into the world of financial crimes investigation, instead of serving individual consulting clients in Denver, we'd be designing systems and policies that would improve outcomes for crime victims throughout the United States. Daniel's technical expertise had proven so valuable that federal prosecutors were requesting his consultation on complex cases involving sophisticated money laundering operations and organized financial crimes. His ability to explain intricate criminal procedures in accessible terms made him invaluable for educating juries and helping judges understand the technical aspects of financial crime prosecutions. We've accidentally become federal law enforcement specialists, I reflected during one of our discussions about accepting the permanent positions. Richard's theft of our bond portfolio launched careers we never could have planned, but that feel more meaningful than anything we'd previously considered. The decision to accept federal positions required relocating permanently to Washington, D.C., and leaving the Denver community where we'd built our consulting practice and established relationships with local victim advocacy organizations. The move would represent another major transition, but federal careers offered resources and authority that could amplify our impact exponentially. Our consulting business in Denver had helped approximately 50 families recover stolen assets and navigate federal investigation procedures during 18 months of operation. Federal positions would allow us to develop training programs and policies that could assist thousands of families annually, while establishing standards for victim advocacy that would improve outcomes across the entire country. The scale of potential impact makes the decision obvious, Daniel concluded after we'd analyzed the professional opportunities and personal implications of federal careers. We can help more families as FBI employees than we'll ever reach as independent consultants, even if federal bureaucracy presents different challenges than private practice. The transition to permanent federal employment occurred smoothly, with responsibilities that built directly on expertise we'd developed through victim advocacy work and consultation with financial crimes investigators. My role involved directing National Victim Services programs, while Daniel focused on developing technical analysis procedures for complex multi-state investigations. Richard's situation had stabilized sufficiently to allow supervised family contact, though his participation in witness protection programs meant our relationship would remain carefully managed by federal security protocols. His cooperation with law enforcement had earned him early release from prison and protection from criminal organizations he'd helped prosecute. But rebuilding family trust would require time and continued demonstration of genuine commitment to making amends. "I understand that forgiveness isn't automatic or guaranteed," Richard said during one of our first post-operation meetings in a secure federal facility. "But I hope that helping prevent other families from experiencing what I put you through will eventually contribute to healing the damage I caused." Our federal careers had transformed us from suburban professionals into national leaders in financial crimes prevention, with expertise that influenced law enforcement policies and victim advocacy procedures across the entire country. The bond portfolio Richard had stolen to cover gambling debts had been recovered with additional criminal proceeds that now funded victim advocacy programs serving families throughout the United States. Standing in my FBI office 18 months after that devastating phone call from the bank's fraud department, I thought about the profound journey that had brought us from suburban Denver to the center of federal law enforcement operations. The woman who'd answered that call could never have imagined she'd become someone federal agencies consulted for expertise in financial crimes, prevention, and victim advocacy. Richard had meant to solve his gambling debts by stealing our carefully saved money, never realizing that his crime would connect us to a federal investigation that would transform us from victims into leaders in protecting other families from financial victimization. His betrayal had destroyed our planned consulting business, but accidentally launched careers dedicated to helping thousands of families recover from similar crimes. 3 years after that phone call that shattered my world, I stood at the podium of the National Crime Victims' Rights Conference in Chicago, looking out at an audience of 800 federal agents, prosecutors, victim advocates, and survivors from across the country. The presentation I was about to deliver would establish new national standards for financial crimes victim services, policies that would impact how every federal agency in America responds to families whose lives have been destroyed by organized criminal operations. The irony wasn't lost on me that the conference was being held just blocks from where Richard had first been recruited into the gambling operation that would eventually consume our family's savings and launch our unexpected careers in federal law enforcement. Chicago's financial district, visible through the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows, represented both the legitimate business world I'd once inhabited and the shadow economy of organized crime that had accidentally become my area of expertise. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying the confidence that had developed through hundreds of presentations to federal audiences. 3 years ago, I was a marketing manager in Denver, whose greatest financial concern was optimizing our bond portfolio allocation. Today, I'm here to discuss how victim-centered approaches to financial crimes investigation can transform both individual recovery outcomes and broader law enforcement effectiveness. The audience included Agent Chen, now promoted to supervisory special agent overseeing financial crimes operations across the western United States. Director Martinez sat in the front row, having championed the victim advocacy programs Daniel and I had developed within the FBI's organizational structure. Amanda Foster had flown in from Denver, where she continued practicing federal crimes law while consulting on the national training materials we'd created together. My presentation detailed the comprehensive victim services framework we'd designed, based on our personal experience and consultation with hundreds of other families affected by organized financial crimes. The framework addressed everything from immediate crisis intervention to long-term asset recovery, providing standardized procedures that federal agencies could implement to improve outcomes for victims while gathering more effective evidence for prosecutions. Traditional approaches to financial crimes investigation often treat victims as sources of evidence rather than human beings whose lives have been devastated, I explained, clicking through slides that showed statistical comparisons between cases handled with our victim-centered protocols versus conventional investigation methods. When victims receive comprehensive support and education about federal procedures, their cooperation improves significantly, leading to better investigation outcomes and higher conviction rates. The data was compelling. Federal cases that implemented our victim advocacy protocols showed 37% higher asset recovery rates, 42% greater victim cooperation with investigations, and 28% shorter timelines from initial report to final resolution. More importantly, victim satisfaction surveys indicated substantially improved psychological outcomes for families who received comprehensive support throughout federal proceedings. Daniel's presentation followed mine, focusing on the technical innovations he'd developed for tracing stolen assets through complex criminal networks. His engineering background, combined with legal knowledge gained through our experience, had enabled him to design analysis software that significantly improved federal success rates in identifying and recovering hidden criminal proceeds. Financial crimes organizations exploit technological vulnerabilities in banking systems and investment platforms, Daniel explained, demonstrating software interfaces that allowed federal agents to visualize complex money movement patterns across multiple institutions and jurisdictions. These tools help investigators identify criminal connections that might otherwise remain hidden, while providing victims with clearer understanding of how their assets were stolen and where recovery efforts should focus. His innovations had been adopted by federal agencies nationwide, improving investigation efficiency while reducing the time families spent in uncertainty about their cases. The software had been instrumental in recovering over $340 million in stolen assets during its first 2 years of implementation, directly benefiting more than 1,500 families across the country. The conference audience included dozens of families whose lives had been transformed by programs we'd developed, people who'd been victims of organized financial crimes and had used our resources to navigate federal investigations and rebuild their lives. Their presence reminded me why our work mattered beyond statistics and policy improvements. Sarah Kim, the restaurant owner whose business partner had stolen company funds for gambling operations, now served on our National Victim Advisory Board and had opened 3 additional locations using assets recovered through federal prosecution. Mark Davis had parlayed his experience into a successful consulting business, helping financial institutions identify and prevent organized criminal infiltration of their systems. The ripple effects of effective victim advocacy extend far beyond individual cases, I continued, displaying a map showing the geographic distribution of families we'd helped and the broader impact of their recovery on their communities. When victims receive proper support and recover stolen assets, they contribute to local economies, support other families facing similar challenges, and often become advocates themselves, multiplying the positive impact of federal intervention. During the lunch break, I was approached by Rebecca Chen, a recently retired federal prosecutor who'd worked on some of the largest financial crimes cases in recent history. Her reputation for securing convictions against sophisticated criminal Organizations was legendary among federal law enforcement professionals, and her interest in our victim advocacy work felt like professional validation from the highest levels. Your approach to victim services has revolutionized how we handle these cases, Rebecca said, settling into the chair beside me in the hotel's quiet restaurant. I've been prosecuting financial crimes for 23 years, and I've never seen victim cooperation and recovery outcomes like what we're achieving with your protocols. She was particularly interested in the psychological support components of our victim advocacy framework, recognizing that families who received comprehensive emotional assistance were more effective witnesses during complex criminal trials. Her endorsement carried significant weight within federal law enforcement circles and would be crucial for expanding our programs to additional agencies. I'm hoping to convince you to consult on a case I'm developing, Rebecca continued, lowering her voice as she described a multi-billion-dollar money laundering operation that had been targeting retirement accounts and investment funds across 12 states. The complexity is unprecedented, and we need victim advocates who understand both the technical and emotional aspects of financial crimes. The case she described involved over 800 victims whose retirement savings had been stolen through sophisticated identity theft and account manipulation schemes. The criminal organization had been operating for over 5 years before federal agencies identified their activities, resulting in massive losses that would require equally sophisticated recovery efforts. This sounds like exactly the type of case our National Victim Services team was designed to handle, I replied, already mentally cataloging the resources and personnel that would be required for effective advocacy with so many affected families. When do you need our team to begin? Consultation? Our conversation was interrupted by Daniel, who'd been approached by representatives from the Treasury Department about expanding his asset recovery software to international investigations. The global nature of modern financial crimes required tools that could trace stolen funds across national boundaries and through foreign banking systems that operated under different regulatory frameworks. They're asking about adapting the software for use in joint investigations with European and Asian law enforcement agencies, Daniel explained, his excitement evident as he described the technical challenges and potential impact of international collaboration. We could help families recover assets that have been moved to offshore accounts or foreign investment vehicles. The international expansion would represent a massive increase in the scope and complexity of our work, but also unprecedented opportunities to help victims whose cases had previously been considered too difficult for effective federal intervention. Many families we'd consulted with had been told their stolen assets were unrecoverable because criminals had moved funds beyond the reach of domestic law enforcement. That afternoon's breakout sessions included presentations by families whose cases had been successfully resolved using our victim advocacy protocols. Their stories provided powerful testimony about the difference comprehensive support could make in both investigation outcomes and personal recovery from financial crimes victimization. Jennifer Martinez, whose father-in-law had stolen her family's business assets for drug purchases, described how our advocacy team had helped her navigate federal procedures while maintaining her restaurant operations and supporting her employees. Her business had not only survived the financial crisis, but had expanded significantly after asset recovery, becoming a model for other family-owned businesses dealing with similar criminal victimization. Thomas Chen, whose investment advisor, had transferred his entire retirement portfolio to offshore gambling operations, explained how our technical analysis had identified hidden assets that federal agents might otherwise have missed. His full asset recovery, including profits generated by criminal use of his funds, had enabled retirement plans that exceeded his pre-victimization expectations. The difference between feeling like a helpless victim and becoming an empowered advocate is having people who understand both the technical and emotional aspects of these crimes, Jennifer explained to the conference audience. Chloe and Daniel's team provided exactly that combination of expertise and emotional support. The afternoon concluded with a panel discussion involving federal officials from multiple agencies who had implemented our victim advocacy protocols in their own jurisdictions. Their reports consistently showed improved outcomes for both victims and investigations, validating the effectiveness of our approach and supporting arguments for nationwide expansion. Agent Martinez, now directing financial crimes operations for the entire southwestern region, described how victim-centered investigation techniques had transformed her office's effectiveness in prosecuting organized criminal operations. When victims receive proper support and education, they become our most valuable allies in building strong cases against sophisticated criminal organizations. As the conference concluded, Director Martinez announced that our victim advocacy framework would become the official standard for all federal financial crimes investigations, with implementation beginning in 6 months and completion expected within 2 years. The announcement represented the culmination of 3 years of program development and the beginning of nationwide impact that could help thousands of families annually. This policy change will ensure that every family affected by organized financial crimes receives the same level of support and advocacy that helped Chloe and Daniel transform their victimization into national leadership in this field, Martinez explained to sustained applause from the conference audience. The evening reception provided opportunities to meet with families whose cases were still pending, people who were currently navigating the complex federal procedures we'd experienced 3 years earlier. Their questions reminded me of my own confusion and fear during those early months when everything felt overwhelming and uncertain. The most important thing to remember, I told a group of recently victimized families, is that federal investigations are complex and time-consuming, but they can be extraordinarily effective when victims receive proper support and advocacy. Your cooperation is valuable, your recovery is possible, and your experience can help other families facing similar challenges. Richard joined us for the reception, his first public appearance since completing witness protection protocols and beginning his new life under federal oversight. His transformation from gambling addict and financial criminal to federal asset and victim advocate remained remarkable, though our family relationships continued requiring careful navigation and ongoing professional counseling. "I can never undo the damage I caused," Richard said during a quiet conversation away from the reception's main activities. "But knowing that my cooperation helped develop programs that protect other families from similar experiences gives my life meaning it hasn't had since my addiction began." His participation in victim advocacy work remained limited by security concerns and the complexity of his legal situation, but his insights about criminal recruitment and manipulation techniques had proven valuable for educational programs designed to help potential victims recognize and avoid financial crimes. The reception also included announcement of the Richard Thompson Foundation, established with proceeds from criminal asset forfeitures, connected to cases where his cooperation had been instrumental. The foundation would fund victim advocacy programs, research into financial crimes prevention, and support services for families dealing with gambling addiction and related criminal activity. Richard's story demonstrates that redemption is possible even after serious criminal behavior, Director Martinez explained during the foundation announcement. His cooperation saved hundreds of families from victimization and contributed to law enforcement capabilities that will protect potential victims for decades to come. As the evening concluded, Daniel and I stood together in the hotel's observation deck, looking out over Chicago's skyline while reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought us from suburban Denver to national leadership in federal law enforcement. The city lights stretched to the horizon, representing millions of families who might benefit from programs we'd developed and policies we'd helped establish. Sometimes I try to imagine what our lives would look like if Richard had never stolen our bond portfolio, Daniel mused, his arm around my shoulders as we watched traffic move through the streets below. We'd probably still be in Denver, running a small marketing consulting business, completely unaware that organized financial crimes even existed. I considered his observation while thinking about the hundreds of families we'd helped, the federal policies we'd influenced, and the ongoing expansion of victim advocacy programs that could protect thousands of people from the devastating experience we'd endured. Our transformation from victims to leaders had required enormous personal cost, but had created benefits that extended far beyond our individual recovery. I think Richard accidentally gave us the most meaningful careers we could have imagined, I replied, watching planes move across the sky toward destinations unknown. He meant to destroy our financial security, but ended up connecting us to purposes that have been more fulfilling than anything we'd planned for ourselves. The bond portfolio he'd stolen had been recovered with additional proceeds that now funded national victim advocacy programs. Our planned consulting business had been destroyed, but replaced with federal careers that influenced law enforcement policies affecting thousands of families annually. The comfortable suburban life he'd shattered had been rebuilt as something more complex but infinitely more meaningful. 6 months later, our victim advocacy protocols had been implemented in 43 federal field offices across the country, with the remaining offices scheduled for completion before year's end. Training programs we'd developed were being adapted for international use by law enforcement agencies in 7 countries, expanding our impact to victims of cross-border financial crimes. The consulting business we'd originally planned to build in Denver had evolved into a national victim advocacy organization operating from Washington, D.C., with field representatives in major cities across the United States. Instead of serving individual clients, we were designing systems that would help thousands of families annually while establishing professional standards for victim advocacy within federal law enforcement. Richard's journey from criminal to federal asset to victim advocate remained unique within law enforcement history, demonstrating possibilities for redemption that had influenced federal policies regarding cooperation agreements and witness protection programs. His foundation had become a model for using criminal asset forfeitures to fund victim services, showing how criminal proceeds could be transformed into resources that protected potential victims. Standing in my office at FBI headquarters, preparing for another day of developing policies that would protect families from organized financial crimes, I thought about the phone call that had shattered my world 3 years earlier. The woman who'd answered that call could never have imagined she'd become someone federal agencies consulted for expertise in financial crimes, prevention, and victim advocacy. Richard had meant to solve his gambling debts by stealing our bond portfolio, never realizing his crime would accidentally launch the most meaningful careers we could have imagined. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us provide exactly the experiences we need to discover our greatest capabilities and most important contributions to protecting others from similar harm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.